Federal Drive is presented by GEHA, Government Employees Health Association, proudly providing health and dental benefits to federal employees and their families. Visit GEHA.com.
And now, the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton, sponsored by GEHA.
Welcome to the Federal Drive on Federal News Network. It's Friday, November 14th. I'm your host, Terry Gerton, and I am glad you're here. Coming up on this hour of the Federal Drive, Army personnel leaders are pushing hard to modernize how the service manages its people. Plus, when the FAR gets a revolutionary overhaul and the government shuts down, who's reading the fine print? Those stories and much more ahead during this hour of the Federal Drive. We begin with this. Thousands of federal contractors today are watching their inboxes, waiting for a message from their agency customers that their invoices for work done over the last 2 months have been accepted. Many of those bills are more than 30 days old, triggering interest payments due to the companies. At least one veteran-owned HubZone firm has about $20 million in outstanding invoices that are now more than 30 days old. Federal News Network's executive editor Jason Miller joins me to discuss why agencies now face a new challenge with the shutdown ending, complying with the Prompt Payment Act. Jason, thanks for being here.
Always a pleasure.
So let's begin by reminding our listeners about the Prompt Payment Act. What is it and what does it require?
This is a law that dates back to roughly 1982. I'm sure it's been updated since then. But basically, the concern back then and now is still right now very front of mind for a lot of vendors is the government was late paying companies. It took them a long time to process the invoice and then pay the invoices, and it was really hurting vendors in a big deal. They didn't have money to pay their vendors, the trickle-down effect. So Congress passed a law, and it says, hey, you have to pay vendors in 30 days. And we've seen even accelerated payments to small businesses over the years, especially during, for instance, COVID or during other times. So basically, this is a law that says, hey, if you're going to take more than 30 days, you have to pay a penalty, and that penalty is interest, and the interest rate for 2025, according to the Treasury Department, is 4.625%. So on the small business that you mentioned, they're owed about $20 million in outstanding invoices. They would have to see interest payments after those invoices they've submitted are older than 30 days.
When the shutdown began, there were already companies who were waiting on payment. What is the new challenge that both agencies and contractors are facing now that the government's reopened after this shutdown?
There's two things that are going on. You're absolutely right, because a lot of business gets done at the end of the fiscal year. So a lot of this one company, as an example, told me, hey, we did a lot of business on September 30th. So those invoices now are 30 days plus, today is the 14th, so that's 14 days, so almost 13 days old. And so they're saying, hey, we're waiting to get paid, our folks are waiting to get paid, and we submitted those invoices, but we don't know if they've been accepted. So the challenge is, okay, well, what invoices are there, and have they been accepted? Because you can't get paid until the invoice is accepted by the government. Now, I've talked to several experts who say, well, acceptance either happens by, yes, Terry, I sent you an email that says they've been accepted, or there's a 7-day period. If I don't hear from you for 7 days, it's automatically accepted. Whether or not the government follows those rules is in question here. And the government also has a backlog. If you haven't been accepting invoices for 43 days, wow, there's probably a pretty big set of emails waiting for you when you get back. And even if you've done some emails, even though you're not supposed to as a government employee, there's still a lot of work that gets done. So how do you triage that and go forward to say when is a invoice accepted? So when does that 30-day clock actually begin?
Even with the end of this shutdown, most agencies are still in a continuing resolution. So they don't have a lot of new money to pay for sort of these things. If vendors are due interest payments, where does that money come from in the agency budgets?
That's the $100 million question, right? Because there's no fund for interest payments. I talked to Tim Solsis. He's a former federal financial management executive. He worked at OMB, Treasury, and the Education Department during his 25-year career. And he goes, a lot of times, since there is no fund for interest payments, they have to come from cuts elsewhere. He said, there may be less overtime. You may not be able to do some hiring. It basically comes from your discretionary budget. And when you have to take money from one pot and put it over here for interest payments, that means less for further down the road. Now, the good news, if there is a silver lining here, is because they're under CR, because agencies are, it's kind of quote unquote early on in the fiscal year, they're not they're not having to look under the couches and the seat cushions for that money to pay this interest. There's already money there. He says further down the road, come April, May, next summer, that's when things will get tight because they had to pay off these interest payments, and that becomes more challenging further down the road.
And what are experts then advising for both the companies and the agencies in terms of reconciling the invoices and then computing the interest payments?
I think there's two things that really stand out. First, Eric Crucius is a procurement attorney and a partner with the law firm Hunton. He says prompt payment has not been an issue for a long time. He rarely hears his clients complain about it or make comments. But he says, listen, you should have been submitting invoices. You should be tracking your costs. You should submit all that to your contracting officer. You should have a conversation with them and say, hey, here's what we think the shutdown we spent during the shutdown. Here's the expenses. Let's talk about how we're going to make us whole. And a lot of this is dependent, Terry, on things like, well, did you get a stop work order? And if you did, what does that mean? There are costs to stop working. Did you get a termination for convenience? Again, costs for terminating a contract for convenience. Or have you been working even at a descoped manner during the shutdown? There are costs there. So you should have those conversations with your contracting officer. You should have all your costs and your expenses tracked and logged so you can explain to them, we spent this much money on this date at this time. Now Tim Solstice, again, he says other people should start triaging. So if you're in the government, for instance, and you're a contracting officer or you're in the financial management world, you should get together and say, okay, what invoices do we have? How do we make the vendors whole? And how quickly can we do it? And who's most important by either length of time or money owed or some set of factors to make this decision?
This has been a really complicated year for contractors between those stop payments and terminations for convenience. This just seems like one more straw on the camel's back. What's the industry assessment?
There's a lot of, I think, frustration across the board because of the uncertainty that you mentioned, how much change there's gone on. And listen, when it comes to prompt payment and when it comes to interest penalties, vendors want that money, but at the same time, they don't want to make their customers mad either. And at a time when their customer relationships are probably most important, do they or don't they submit for that? Do they lodge a claim or not? And I think that's a big question. The industry people I spoke with, for instance, in this small hub zone company, they have people at their doorstep saying, you need to pay us for those products. They have a line of credit that, as soon as it gets to, for instance, 80% of that line of credit, the bank wants to know what's going on. Why do you spend so much money about your line of credit? And when can we expect to see some of that money back? So there's a lot of challenges they have, and these prompt payment penalties, these interest payments, could really mean a difference to help make up for a lot of the lost revenue. And if some of these companies got stop work orders or got termination for convenience, that's another hit that they've taken, and these interest penalties could help them kind of ensure that they don't have to lay people off or even let them hire for the future because they have that cash coming in. So there's a lot of considerations going on here, and I think this is just adding to the challenges they've seen all throughout the year.
That's Federal News Network's executive editor, Jason Miller. Jason, thanks for shedding some light on this often overlooked aspect of restarting the government.
My pleasure, Terry.
You can find his story at federalnewsnetwork.com. Up next, when the FAR gets a revolutionary overhaul and the government shuts down, who's reading the fine print? This is the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. Welcome back to the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. The FAR Council eliminated a third of commercial contracting clauses and rewrote major acquisition rules in a single summer, and they released it all just before the shutdown. Now, agencies are adopting the revolutionary FAR overhaul at different speeds, leaving contractors to navigate a patchwork of new procedures while dealing with expiring contracts and furloughed contracting officers. Former GSA Administrator Emily Murphy spoke with Federal News Network's Eric White to break down just what's actually revolutionary about these changes and why vendors must comment on what works and not just what doesn't.
Yeah, let's start from the FAR overhaul perspective. They were able to get that out right before the shutdown occurred. I wanted to see what your initial thoughts were and what you're hearing from industry folks who are going to have to comply with these new rules.
So it's really interesting. Very last minute, obviously they got everything out. They wanted to meet that deadline. And I've got to commend the folks at OFPP, GSA, NASA, DOD, who all got that out. And they worked really hard to get that out so that it would be out there before frankly, many of them ended up getting furloughed. They got Part 15 out, Part 16 out, so they've got a lot of stuff out at the very last minute, and there's a lot there to still digest. Part 16, which is type of contracts, was really interesting because it created BPAs against GWACs, which is something we haven't seen before. Lots of sections came out with even just PDFs, and they've now been updated to include the actual downloadable, the actual text. But there was a lot there. One thing that contractors should be paying attention to right now is that even though these have all gone out, if you go to the Revolutionary FAR overhaul site, you'll see that not all of them have been adopted at every agency. And so that's something they should be very, very aware of depending on where they're contracting. So some of the deviations have only been adopted by 2-3 agencies. Others have more than 30 agencies that have adopted them. But when you consider how many agencies there are, that still isn't a very large number. And so it becomes a question of, are the agencies considering these to be, just adopted by, in absence of them taking any action? Is it that they're still thinking through the deviations? They need to do some additional modifications to a deviation they would be doing? Because these were model deviations. They were not agency-specific deviations. And then this was the FAR Council putting these out with the intention of doing it as a deviation that agencies could adopt and start implementing right away as they started an official rulemaking process. And the expectation was that official rulemaking would start sometime mid-November. Now, I don't know if that's gotten slowed down by the shutdown or not, but it raises a lot of questions. You still can go on to the acquisition.gov website and give informal comments. And I would suggest anyone who's thinking of doing so, do that. But then start coming up with what they want their real comments, their official comments to be on those rules. What did the FAR Council get right? And then where are there areas that need changes and they need some adjustments? And I trace it with both because frequently, at least back in the days when I was actually working on the FAR Council stuff in the Bush administration, we would frequently get comments back from people only about what they disliked. They wouldn't tell us what was good. And when you don't tell agencies what is good, they may actually get rid of what it was that you liked in the FAR changes because they're not hearing people step up and say, that was a good change. That's going to make things better. Please keep that. If all they hear from is people saying we don't like anything, you never know what's going to then survive that comment period. So it's very important to comment not just on what you think needs to be changed, but also on what needs to be retained.
I think any Amazon reviewer will cite the same experience if they have that. They only tell me what they don't like. They titled it the Revolutionary FAR Overhaul. Is that? I want to get your opinion. Is that an appropriate title? Is this really revolutionary, or is this a bit of labeling that we've seen from the Trump administration in the past?
I'm not sure that they could be truly and utterly revolutionary because there were statutory constraints, but they did about everything they could within that statutory framework. They got rid of a third of the clauses that affect commercial contracting. They got rid of the reps and certs. Lots of them. It's going to be much easier to register as a federal contractor going forward. The commercial type contracting that they broke it down into commercial type contracting for under simplified procedures versus non-commercial, so that we were dividing the world there. It's the only place where we saw new regulations coming in. Part 15 got rid of the old discussions and replaced it with negotiations. There is a lot of change. Part 8, taking the schedules ordering procedures out of the FAR and putting them back into the GSA acquisition regulations. That's pretty revolutionary. So there's a lot in there that is very much worth noting and is going to change how agencies operate and how vendors have to comply. It should streamline things. It should speed things up. It really does push decision-making down to the lowest level possible. And it will be interesting to see, since the FAR Council noted on the website that things that require a statutory or regulatory statutory changes or changes to executive order would be addressed with the second round of this with the official rulemaking. So whether there's even more up their sleeve, if there's going to be more that happens. But I think that they did a lot to make this fairly momentous, and they did it really fast. You remember the last time they tried to rewrite Part 15, it took years. They did it over the course of a summer while they did every other part of the FAR as well.
We're speaking with Emily Murphy, former GSA administrator and senior fellow at George Mason University Baroni Center for Government Contracting. Let's get to the vendors themselves. Shutdown is still ongoing as of this recording. What are you hearing and seeing from those vendors that have long-term contracts that are coming to a close or they're going to need some help operating in this new FAR environment, and they may not have the necessary guidance that they could use at a time like this?
So the first thing I'd say to companies that are operating, have a contract that's about to lapse, read your contract. Make sure you know what's in it. Most contracts have a provision in there. It's usually in 52-217, sometimes -8, sometimes -9, on how to extend that work. Make sure you know which clause you have or what clauses you have, what options are there. I'm hearing some talks about taking a no-cost extension. And that's a decision agencies and vendors are going to have to make, but the vendors should be aware when they do that, they're performing at risk. That there is a good chance that they may not ever have that option exercised, that they may not have that ability to get the reimbursed for that. They certainly won't get reimbursed for a no-cost extension, but they may not have something happen once the government shutdown is over. So it's got to be a business decision they're making at that point in time. But ultimately, know what's in your contract, know to the greatest extent possible who it is you're dealing with at the agency, what set of rules they're following at this point in time, and have options and a strategy you're willing to propose to the government to make it easier for them, because whether we're back from the shutdown by the time this airs or we're still in a shutdown, you've got a very small workforce dealing with a lot of work. And the easier you can make it for them, the better it's going to be.
We've seen these shutdowns now popping up every couple of years or so, usually right around this time of year. Do you see any adjustments coming down the pipeline by vendors of, putting provisions into contracts or taking necessary precautions, maybe waiting until they or messing with extensions or deadlines before they hear whether or not there is going to be one or not, especially, like I said, around this time of year when shutdowns seem to occur?
Well, the last major shutdown that happened December of 2018, and it went through January of 2019. So it was the 35-day shutdown. It was the longest shutdown we've ever had. So while in the past it was fairly, you thought of right after the fiscal year there being a risk of shutdown, the fact that it was a long shutdown that didn't start until just before Christmas. And it was, I remember because I was at GSA at the time and people had gone home for the holiday before the shutdown happened. That made it a tough time. There's never a good time for a shutdown, so I shouldn't say it, but that was a tough time for people to be shut down on Christmas. I don't know that they're trying to time a shutdown. It's sort of reading tea leaves, or trying to do some fortune telling. I think that, smart companies, though, are planning to know that government shutdowns do happen, and they have a plan for their workforce when that's going to happen, whether it's mandatory training that they need their employees to be taking, to maintain certifications, to comply with a government requirement, whether it's the upskilling of that workforce, whether it's working on strategic planning documents or other things. They've thought about how they're going to use their workforce if the workforce isn't able to show up. We talk a lot about what's going to happen to federal employees and will they be paid for the work that for this time that they have been furloughed. The contractors don't get paid, and good contractors try to do everything in their power to keep paying their employees, but they're never going to be made whole for that. And there's a limit to how long a small business and mid-sized business can continue to pay people to not work. And we need to be very aware that that this hits the industrial base, not just the federal employee base, and that both sides of this are feeling a lot of tension right now and a lot of stress.
Wanted to finish up here by getting your thoughts on the East Wing renovation happening at the White House. People were obviously going back and forth about the actual move itself, but people like you and I were probably thinking, I wonder how that contract was structured. What are your thoughts? Who do you think was handling it? We've got really three choices, the Executive Office of the President, GSA, your former camp, or even the Park Service, as the White House is actually designated as a national park.
It is, and it's interesting because when I was GSA administrator, we were looking at doing renovations in the West Wing, and that very much would have been a GSA contract. It would have been the Public Building Service doing that work. The East Wing, though, probably is going to fall into either the National Park Service or the Administrative Office of the President that would be doing that work. It's not a GSA building once you hit the East Wing. It's fascinating when you look at the White House complex. There's an agreement that tells you down to like what brick along the sidewalk is managed by GSA versus by Interior versus whoever else, and who's got responsibility for what. East Wing would definitely be either the what they call Room 1 or would be National Park Service.
And when a private donor enters the picture, I imagine that can add some complications to the paperwork. I see you shaking your head now for those of us not watching on video. What does that entail? And did you ever have any experience with a private donor paying for something that the government usually does?
I never had that experience at GSA. When I was at SBA had a lot of gift authority, and we did occasionally get sponsorships or things along those lines that would come into play. It will allow them to go a lot faster because they've got private funds. But my recollection is that when they did the renovation of the White House years ago under Jackie Kennedy, that was also funded a lot through private donations. And so there is precedent for private donations going in and assisting with paying for these things. And it'll be interesting to see when the contract details come out, and I'm sure they will, how it's all been structured and how it's proceeding. And you look forward to getting a chance to look through those documents someday.
Emily Murphy is former GSA administrator, now senior fellow at the George Mason University Baroni Center for Government Contracting. Thank you as always.
Thank you.
We'll post this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Still to come, how a former DHS IT leader redefined what zero trust compliance really means. But first, Army personnel leaders are pushing hard to modernize how the service manages its people. You're listening to The Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. Welcome back to The Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. From digitizing pay and HR processes to professionalizing recruiters and accelerating policy change, Army personnel leaders are pushing hard to modernize how the service manages its people. Lieutenant General Brian Eifler, Army G1, and Sergeant Major Smoke Stevens met me at the AUSA conference to discuss how technology and leadership are shaping Army retention, readiness, and the future of the total force. General Eifler, Sergeant Major Stevens, thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, honored to be here.
The theme of AUSA is agile, adaptive, and lethal. So how does that translate into what you all are working on in terms of the Army personnel strategy?
Well, we always have to remember, and the Chief just mentioned it, and the Secretary did yesterday, everything we do is for the warfighter. Everything has to be from the soldier's perspective. We could come up with some great plans, some great processes, some great things, but if they don't help the warfighter and they just help those that are trying to help the warfighter, that's not good enough. We need to have systems that are agile and adaptive and could be more up-to-date in the times. In the 21st century, we still do a lot of things processes-wise in the Pentagon, outside the Pentagon, that have a lot of bureaucratic processes, some systems that are just old. I know Smoke talked about it earlier today about some of the processes that we use with paper and that we don't really need, but we just keep doing it. Or we'll take something, for example, a paper, and we'll digitize it, put it in a computer, and say, hey, we're modern. That's not what we need to be doing. We need to do something that takes away all the extra time, extra resources from a soldier and gives it back to them. So everything from coming into the Army, you come in, you input all your data, and you shouldn't have to input it again. Every time we go to a meeting or go to a doctor or something, we're filling out forms again. We shouldn't be doing that There's no need. It's in the system. One of the big systems, IPSA, everything feeds into that. It feeds into everything. So we're trying to use the technology that's available that we have to make it better instead of continuing to do things the old way. Transformation takes a lot of time and effort for a huge organization that we have, all composed. So it takes a little bit more time, and so I get a little impatient with it as the chief and the secretary. So as you heard in the last 24 hours, we're trying to push that and make it go faster. And it's really expensive, and it shouldn't be. And we've got to cut that stuff out. And we need to work with companies and contractors that are willing to do the right thing here and not just try to bilk the Army for a capability. And then we need to be able to fix it. Whether it's rewriting code or fixing a piece of equipment, it shouldn't be the right to the contractor withhold that. We should be able to do that. We need to, and that's the agility part. We're never going to be satisfied with our administrative system, IPSA. We're not going to finish it and say, okay, we're done. Nothing more to do. We're always changing policies. We're always changing something. So we've got to be able to adjust and tweak it to modern and stay with the program instead of staying something that was, hey, it was good in 2017 and we're still using it in the same way and not adjusting because we can't. So that's a little bit of what it means to me. And a lot of the paperwork, a lot of the processes for boards, how we do boards, you mentioned AI, putting AI into that to not replace people's decisions, but to quell down the masses of files that they're looking at that AI can easily do to deduce, hey, here's the population you really need to be looking at. So that's just a little bit. I don't want to take up all the time because I know Sergeant Major Stevens has got a couple of comments on that.
Sergeant Major?
So, ma'am, you asked specifically on the strategy, and we just heard the chief talk about soldier touch points. And what does that mean when we talk about new equipment or kit? Specifically in our space, the people space, ensuring that our teammates, whether it's from the Human Resources Command or from the IPSA team, they're getting out to organizations, they're seeing what's working best when it comes to our personnel and pay system. And then the same for us. We've gone to Poland, we've gone to Korea. We want to see what's actually working, what's not working. Come back, here to Crystal City, sit down with the IPSA team, with the contractors, and say, hey, make these tweaks, because we've seen troopers on the ground, provide something that can make something better for the Army.
So you all are dealing with soldiers in their whole life cycle, from recruitment to retirement.
Yep.
What is happening along that process? I mean, the Army's doing pretty well with recruiting and retention right now. What's driving your success, and how are you going to sustain it?
Well, there's multiple reasons, and you almost have to ask each of the trainees that are come in of why, because everybody has their own personal story, like a fingerprint, and I can't put it down as one thing, but there's a lot of good reasons to serve today, and we're making it very appealing with the options that they can serve. Really, the Future Soldier Prep course has been a boon of success. Those folks that maybe have been a little out of shape or didn't test well in the academe, getting a second chance, these people have heart and grit. I equivocated to walk-ons in football. So we get our Division 1A scholarships players, they come in, but FSPC gives us the walk-ons. These are the Rudies out there that just need a shot. And they're probably better than Rudies because they just do more than one play, but they keep going, and they have a heart and a grit that we are tapping into, and they're doing very well. They're doing just as well as the people that didn't go through that. So things like that are giving more opportunities to do things, and then once they get in, other opportunities to move from one specialty to another, both on the officer side and the enlisted, to do the reclass. That's something that we're really opening up earlier on. So you get in the Army like, hey, I didn't really like this MOS, but I like that one. And there's room. We can facilitate that. So those are some of the things along the way that we're doing.
Specifically with recruiting, one thing that we did identify that, we got right was changing our recruiting workforce.
Right.
Focusing on talent acquisition, upskilling, the skill set that they had, the training that they went through, sending them out to industry and making them better. That has paid dividends, 10 times fold. And I will say, part of the retention standpoint, I think it really goes back to leadership, too. We have phenomenal leaders in our organizations that really understand the importance of you got to get to know your service members. You got to make sure they're going through challenging, tough, realistic training to show, hey, this is what I came in the Army to do, and I'm a part of something bigger than myself.
So the recruiting, the professionalization of the recruiting force has been more than just a pilot now. It's going to be institutionalized and really paying benefits.
Yes, ma'am, absolutely. Both on the enlisted and the warrant officer side. We're seeing the benefits of what talent acquisition is doing for us.
That's great to hear. Sir, you also mentioned at the beginning, you talked about all the compos, so active, guard, and reserve.
That's right.
When you think about the total force, how would you assess the readiness of the total force these days?
Well, I think we're ready, and I think we never can say that we're ready enough. I think we always are on a journey of readiness. We always got to get better. And it's not just becoming a trained expert in your craft, but as a collective element. So whether it's a squad, a platoon, company, battalion, brigade, division, corps, theater, army, all of us have to continue. We can't train enough. And that's a challenge. It's an expensive way to look at things, but it's not as expensive as not doing it and going to the war and paying for it in lives and the blood and treasure of the United States. So I think we always have to continue training. I'm very proud of the units I've been in and how we train and how we pursue doing hard, crucible-like, difficult, challenging training, because that's what combat's going to bring. We have to continue to do that, and we have to keep pushing ourselves. It's very dangerous. It's very hard. But I don't think we can ever be satisfied, to quote Ralph Puckett, where we are. We always have to keep getting better. And what we're talking about really this week is the technology. We can't just rest on our laurels. M1 tank's a great tank, but it's not good enough, not in the future. We have to make the changes that they're talking about with some automation, some AI, and some of those things. So I think we're really good. I still think we're the best in the world, but I don't think we can sit there and brag about it. I think we need to continue to measure up to that every day.
Well, the Army Transformation Initiative is changing equipment. It's changing force structure, and equipment is changing so fast. The Army's Training and Doctrine Command, Futures Command, now you have the Transformation Command. How is all of that playing into what a service member can expect to be able to do in the Army from the time they come in?
I think understanding the direction that the Army is going and knowing that, and both our Secretary and our Chief and our SMA always says this, the soldier and everything that we're supposed to provide for the soldier is the focal point. Yep. As soon as you hear that, you should know right up front, I'm coming into an organization that cares about me and the things that I need to have in order to fight and win. So I think understanding, predictability of what we're going to do for the service member is number one. The combination of, headquarters realigning and saying, hey, we're putting, these specific resources to ensure that we're finding efficiencies. In our 30-plus years of serving, I mean, we have never seen anything like that where, again, the Department of the Army has said this is what we need in order to give back, to the soldier. Yeah,
I think it's choose your own adventure, right? There's so many MOSs and specialties that you could do and what you can qualify for, and there's always a journey that you could adjust from if you don't like something. But I think a lot of what we bring of retaining good talent is our leadership. People want to be valued. People want to be led by leaders that they want to emulate. The more people we have like that, the more people are going to want to stay in a unit or in a location or in the Army as a team because they feel like they're valued, they're making a difference, they're being fulfilled, and their leaders are servant leaders. They're caring for them and taking care of them, making sure they have the resources and the training to make them ready for a war or combat or whatever happens.
Well, you mentioned AI earlier and deploying AI into HR processes, but are you also bringing AI to bear in terms of continuous learning? And it can't just be go into the basic course, go into the advanced course, right? Things are changing so quickly. How are you bringing those kinds of modern tools into lifecycle management?
Yeah, I think it's a challenge, right? Because it's not something we're used to. But as the chief just mentioned, there's two types of companies in the future: those that are powered by AI and those that are out of business. So we have to start incorporating. We're doing it a little bit slowly and measured because a lot of people are concerned about using too much AI. But I think we're using it in chunks and steps forward. Like I implied with the some of our promotion boards, what you could do instead of spending several weeks on thousands of files and going through every file, you can probably use with much success artificial intelligence and machine learning to get down to a manageable file level so that you can really invest your time as a board member to not get tired, to not get jaded or lazy in your file assessments, but really focus on what you really need to do. And I think things like that are a great example of what we can do that now. We should be doing that. And so we're helping also by bringing in folks, direct commissioning folks that have data scientist backgrounds, coders and stuff like that, because we need to have some in the Army that can say, and we have that in IPSA, for example. We have some of those that just came in and they love doing this. They love fixing and solving Army problems that affect the entire Army. So we need to not only just, like you said, to teach it, but we need to breed it into how we do things and expectations and develop people to come in with that skill set that can help us get to that next level.
If I can add, so on the enlisted side with PME, I mean, we started this journey a few years ago, digital job book. Ensuring that, how much time does an actual, human being, an instructor need in order to deliver, a method of training.
Right.
So, again, we found efficiencies, and we'll continue to lean on, academia and the things that are happening out in the college world to bring into, our professional military education.
Yeah, at the scope and scale, we need external help. I mean, we can't do it all ourselves.
Well, you've talked about a lot of things that you have on your plate, a lot of initiatives, a lot of changes. What's at the top of your Army G1 wish list?
Do you want to go first?
At the top. So the speed that we can make policy changes. There are a lot of things that, and I'll use an example. General Eifler will go to a very, senior sync, a whiteboard session, and it's like, okay, this makes sense. Let's make this change. There are layers of things that we have to go through to make those changes. That's tough when we know we want to deliver something, to the field immediately. Obviously, we don't want to get ahead of, anything that has to go through some type of review. But, again, at the top of the list is how do we make policy changes, to the speed that we need it to happen.
Yeah, and how do we limit to, who really needs to see it?
Yeah.
A lot of people like to have their hands on the steering wheel, but we only need one driver. And so when you like he implied, we'll get something, everybody wants to do it, but then everybody will start to touch it. I mean, we don't need everybody to touch it. We just need to coordinate it. And I think there's that needs to be overhauled inside the Pentagon, and that's what we're trying to do. I think that's good. I think one of my challenges is the Secretary spoke yesterday, is making sure we're holding accountable our industry partners with things, delivering, for example, IPSA, and getting it to the next level faster and less expensive, quite honestly. That is what keeps me up at night, is this is for soldiers. We have the capability and technology, but it's taken a little bit too long. We're going to incorporate pay into IPSA. Mm-hmm. We got to get moving on that, and we've got to change all the other systems that feed into IPSA, as well as those that it feeds into at the same pace, and make sure it's all connecting. So that's one of my big wish lists. And then also, if I have two wishes, the civilian workforce overhaul. I mean, that's something that we've been looking for, whether it's pay scales, development. The hiring process is archaic. It's not how we should be doing things. Got to be updated. really above us. But those are the two wishes that I would probably wish for.
Well, I want to thank you both for sharing your world with us today. General Eifler, Sergeant Major Stevens, thank you both.
Thank you, Tim.
Lieutenant General Brian Eifler is the Army's Deputy Chief of Staff G1. Sergeant Major Christopher Smoke Stevens is the U.S. Army G1 Sergeant Major. We'll post this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Subscribe to the Federal Drive wherever you get your podcasts. And still to come, how a former DHS IT leader redefined what zero trust compliance really means. This is the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. Welcome back to the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. CISA built a zero-trust architecture with 5 pillars. The Defense Department uses 7. Homeland Security took the best of both and added more. Don Yeske, who recently left federal service after 2 years as DHS's Director of National Security in the Cyber Division, tells Federal News Network's executive editor Jason Miller why DHS had to take a different path.
Where we were within DHS when I left is we had developed a zero trust strategy. We had developed a zero trust architecture. That zero trust architecture differs from other federal zero trust architecture in several key ways. And I'm proud of that, and I'm excited by that. And I'm happy to tell you more about that. What this role at Virtru, I think, is going to do is it's going to capitalize on that experience, which is actually groundbreaking inside the federal government, bringing those insights to other departments and agencies that otherwise wouldn't have those insights at their beck and call about how to actually make progress beyond just basic controls. If you look at OMB M2209, it prescribes tasks. Those tasks are important. But that itself is not a zero trust strategy, right? Even if you do everything that M2209 told us to do, and by the way, those tasks were due at the beginning of this year, even if you did it all, that doesn't mean, okay, goal achieved, we're done with zero trust, move on to the next thing. What it means is you're much better positioned now to do the hard things that you had to do that we hadn't even contemplated telling you to do yet. So where we were with DHS at the time that I left is we were just publishing this really groundbreaking architecture that lays out what the hard parts actually are and begins to attack them. And frankly, it's all about the data pillar. There are multiple zero trust architectures out there. 5 pillars, 7 pillars, 8 pillars. All of them have a data pillar. And being the guy who led this for the Department of the Navy and being the guy who led this for the Department of Homeland Security, I can tell you where I worked, the data pillar was the hard part. It was where we were sucking wind. I can also tell you everyone else was in the same boat. There really wasn't anybody who was making hay on the tasks in the data pillar. This is the hard part of zero trust. It's also what drew me to Virtru because it's where we operate. We're attacking the hardest target in zero trust. It is hard work. It's kind of a windmill to tilt at. And an unfortunate character flaw of mine is I do tilt at windmills. So I felt like this was important. I felt like it was really difficult, and that drew me toward an opportunity here.
When I talk to folks around zero trust, data pillar is always the one that comes up as, well, we're just starting or we're just thinking about it. You know, the identity was attacked first. A lot of folks looked at network second, thinking about, for instance, moving to software-defined or SASE architectures. But data was the one that, okay, how do we start to attack that? So I'm glad you brought up the new architecture that you had kind of helped put together at DHS. Let's maybe talk a little bit about that, what that looks like, what it means. Because as you said, as you lay the groundwork at DHS, it's also something that other agencies can start to benefit from.
They certainly can. It's important to understand, I think, the opportunity created by building an architecture for DHS, and that is that DHS is incredibly broad. It does a little bit of everything the government does. If it exists in the federal government, it exists at DHS. There are more sworn law enforcement officers at DHS than anywhere else in the federal government. There is a military service within DHS, the Coast Guard, right? There are multiple small navies and a small Air Force. There's various kinds of regulatory authority, including authority over transportation networks and ports. And, like FEMA, completely unique in the federal government, only exists at DHS. So all of that is to say, if we had to deal with it anywhere, we had to deal with it inside of DHS. So we had to build an architecture that would do that. So it is very broad. What's different about it is we view, I will say, during my time at DHS, we viewed the problem of zero trust as coming in two broad phases. Phase one, where you're just beginning to think about zero trust and you're just beginning to adjust your approach, is where you start to take on the idea that, hey, my network boundary can't be my primary, let alone sole line of defense, right? I've got to start shrinking those boundaries around the things that I'm trying to protect. I've got to start defending within my network architecture, not just from the outside of it. I've got to start viewing the things that are happening within my network with suspicion, right? And those are all building on core tenets of zero trust, exactly as outlined in 800-207. Where 800-207 stops, and where all federal architecture until DHS built a different one stopped, was right there. It took you right up to the precipice of, okay, you've segmented networks, you've done some things to better protect data at rest, you've improved your identity and authentication and authorization processes. Okay, these are all things you have to do. And that's where federal architecture stopped. 3 problems with that. 1, all federal architectures, I think, have a pervasive, almost sole focus on products, on technology. Tech is important, but tech is not the solution. Quick anecdote, an Army infantry division, I don't want to call out which one, briefed at a meeting where I was the senior representative for the Department of the Navy at the time, at a conference about zero trust and about specifically coalition, international, tactical interoperability in zero trust. And the brief was that the core of it was that they had started to take on board the ideas of zero trust and looked at the technology they already had, the stuff that was already fielded to them, and started to ask the question, okay, what can I do with the switches and routers and web application firewalls that I already have? What can I do to reframe my network and to improve my identity and to improve my defenses, to begin to take on board this different approach, which is worry less about who gets into your network and worry more about what happens once they have access, right? Like, observe everything, look for bad things, react to those bad things. And this Army Infantry Division, for the first time after taking on board those principles, defeated an NSA red team. They had never defeated a red team before. And with no new technology at all, defeated a red team. And A, it's an amazing testament to those people, but B, it's also an exemplar of the fact, and it's a fact, that zero trust is something you do, it's not something you buy. In spite of that, federal architecture has this pervasive focus on product. So at DHS, the way we chose to describe zero trust capability was as a series of capabilities. And we chose, with malice aforethought, to measure those capabilities at the organization, not at the system, not at the component, not as a function of design. Organizations have capabilities, and those capabilities are comprised of 3 big parts. People, who's responsible for the thing you're describing within your organization? Process, how have you chosen to do the thing that you're describing at your organization? And products, what helps you do that?
Don Yeske is Senior Solutions Architect Federal at Virtue and a former Director of National Security in the Cyber Division at the Homeland Security Department. He's speaking there with Federal News Network's Executive Editor, Jason Miller. You can find their full conversation at federalnewsnetwork.com. Search Ask the CIO. The bill that reopened the government also includes a temporary extension of a landmark cyber information law. The Cybersecurity Information Sharing Act of 2015 expired on October 1st. Now it's in force again, at least until January 30th. Federal News Network's Justin Doubleday joins me with more on what could be a complicated reauthorization path for CISA 2015. Justin, thanks for being here.
Hey, Terry, thanks for having me.
Were you surprised to see at least an interim reauthorization for this in the continuing resolution?
It wasn't a big surprise because there was another short-term extension tacked on to the original CR that passed the House back in September. And then, of course, we had this very, very long shutdown debates for the last month and a half. But once they came up with a new CR in the Senate, folks were quickly looking for this CISA 2015 extension, and lo and behold, there it was. So once again, CISA 2015 will be the law of the land at least until January 30th.
So what are people saying about the short-term extension? Did it include any new provisions? Is it just business as usual?
It's just a clean extension, as you might call it. Essentially, it just extends the terms of the original law for another 2.5 months without changing anything about the law itself. And so folks are very happy that there is this law now in force again. There was a lot of concern that the longer that this lapse lasted, it would degrade cybersecurity information sharing because companies would face more legal risks for sharing that cyber data. So people are excited that it's back in place and are applauding that. But at the same time, they're warning, look, we can't be in this situation again come January. There needs to be a longer term fix.
Well, did we see any impact of the breakdown in CISA cooperation provisions? Were there any impacts to show during the lapse?
What folks told me is that while information sharing still happened during the lapse, it slowed down. And that's because the information that companies would normally share that would be protected by the provisions of CISA 2015, these liability and privacy protections, now that information had to go through some extra layers of legal review because you didn't have those blanket protections in place. And so while, folks like CISA Executive Assistant Director for Cybersecurity, Nick Anderson, he was saying at the end of October that information sharing was holding steady. But folks told me that the reintroduction of legal review into these individual decisions about whether to share cyber threat indicators, that slowed it down, and it was going to start having the kind of cumulative effect of reducing information sharing over time.
Well, before the shutdown and prior to the lapse in this authorization, a lot of people were talking about the need to reform the CISA Act before a new authorization came into place. Where does that stand now that Congress is back in session?
Well, it's complicated. The calls for reform are still there. In the House Homeland Security Committee Chairman Andrew Garbarino has put forward a bill called the Widespread Information Management for the Welfare of Infrastructure and Government Act. It's a mouthful, but essentially it is a 10-year CISA 2015 reauthorization that does include some updates, updates definitions to account for advances in artificial intelligence and the fact that AI will need to be secured, and it's creating complications for cybersecurity. It would also require the Department of Homeland Security to improve its outreach to industry on emerging cyber threats. And it would include all of the provisions, the protections that were already in place, starting with CISA 2015. That's in the House. That's passed the Homeland Security Committee. It's waiting for a full vote on the House floor. In the Senate, it's much more complicated because Senate Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee Chairman Rand Paul is opposed to any sort of CISA 2015 reauthorization that doesn't include some sort of amendment that prohibits or forbids the government from essentially working on disinformation efforts. This is essentially one of Senator Paul's big issues is the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, also called CISA, had been working with social media companies to tamp down disinformation, especially around the 2020 election and the pandemic. Senator Paul and other conservatives have considered that tantamount to infringing on the First Amendment. And so this is one of his big issues. cyber experts tell me that essentially it's conflating a separate law with CISA, the agency, and CISA, the agency's disinformation efforts have nothing to do with the information sharing protections in the law. But the bottom line is Senator Paul is essentially going to be something of a roadblock to a lot of bipartisan reauthorization efforts that otherwise would move forward. And so the question is, does Senator Paul get his way and have some sort of debate over the First Amendment as part of this reauthorization? Or does Senate Majority Leader John Thune essentially do an end around Senator Paul to get this over the finish line?
It sounds like that'll be a tricky conference negotiation when it finally happens,
to say the least. And the other big deal is whether, House Representative Andrew Garbarino's bill is the one that kind of moves forward with those changes, or whether a quote-unquote clean reauthorization moves forward. That's what's been put forward by Senator Gary Peters and Mike Rounds. That would just extend the law without any changes for another 10 years. So there's a lot swirling around in Congress with the future of this law.
Has the White House said what its position is on reauthorizing CISA 2015?
The White House, when they've talked about it, has said that they want a clean reauthorization, like the bill that Senator Peters is championing. The White House National Cyber Director Sean Cairncross has said multiple times that the White House is pushing for a 10-year clean reauthorization. He's called it a common sense law, and it's something that the White House wants to have done. The big question is, that's National Cyber Director Sean Cairncross, certainly an important figure, but does this become a bigger issue for the White House beyond the cyber office? Is this something that the White House writ large throws its weight around? It's a little bit of an in-the-weeds issue. It's not necessarily something that you could see President Trump posting about on Truth Social, but does the White House wade into this debate more forcefully as Congress considers reauthorization efforts? That's something that we have yet to see.
Well, given the holiday schedule, January 30th isn't really that far away. So maybe a simple approach to the reauthorization is the most likely to succeed.
I think that's why you see, folks like Sean Cairncross saying, let's just do a clean reauthorization and move forward.
That's Federal News Network's Justin Doubleday. Justin, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Terry.
You can find his story at federalnewsnetwork.com. The Federal Drive with Terry Gerton is produced by Eric White and Michelle Sandiford. Our web editors are Daisy Thornton and Stephanie Wright. For the latest updates, stay with federalnewsnetwork.com or follow us on Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn. I'm Terry Gerton. Thanks for listening.